I still remembered the sting on my cheek when it happened, but nothing prepared me for the moment my own daughter slapped me outside the courthouse. It all happened so fast. 1 second I was stepping out into the sunlight, clutching my purse and trying to steady my breath, and the next, Emily was standing in front of me with that mocking smile she had perfected over the past months. "Move, mother," she said, her voice tight and sharp enough to cut glass. "You're in the way." Before I could even process the words, her hand struck my face so hard my head snapped to the side. I staggered, losing my balance, and the rough surface of the courthouse steps scraped my palm as I tried to keep from falling. People nearby gasped. Some stared. Some pretended not to notice. But no one stepped in. No one ever does in moments like these. I turned toward her, stunned, my vision blurring for a second. "Emily, why would you? Don't act pathetic," she snapped, pushing me again, harder this time. My knee buckled. I felt a sharp pain shoot up my leg. "You are the ruin of this family. Do you hear me? The ruin." Her voice echoed against the stone building, drawing more attention. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Not from shame but from disbelief. My daughter. My only child. A woman I raised, a woman I loved more fiercely than my own life, shouting at me like I was some stranger on the street. And right beside her, standing silent, stiff and cold, was my husband, Richard. His arms were crossed, his face expressionless, almost bored. He didn't touch me or yell at me, but somehow his silence hurt more than Emily's slap. He wouldn't even look at me. "Richard," I whispered. "Please tell her to stop." He didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. Emily stepped closer, her breath hot against my face. "You brought this on yourself, you wretched old woman. You think you can keep control over everything forever? Your time is over." Her words sliced straight through me. At 68, I had lived long enough to know the power of words. Not just the words spoken in anger, but the ones spoken with conviction. And she meant every word. People were still watching. A few whispered. A courthouse security guard glanced our way but didn't move. Maybe he thought it was just a family argument gone too far. Maybe he didn't care. "Emily, please," I said softly. "This isn't you." She laughed. A cruel, almost delighted sound. "Oh, mother, you really don't know me at all." She lifted her hand again, and for a moment I thought she would strike me a second time. But something in my face must have startled her. Or maybe she'd grown bored. She lowered her hand slowly and smoothed her hair back, her smile returning like a mask snapping into place. Then as I stood there trembling, she said, "Let's go inside. We have business to settle." They walked past me, my daughter and my husband side by side, united against me as if I were the enemy. I watched them climb the courthouse steps without a single backward glance. My heart ached, but something else stirred inside me too. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. A cold awareness settling deep in my bones. Something was very, very wrong, and I no longer recognized the people I loved most. I stood there for several seconds, trying to breathe, trying to steady myself. My cheek burned, my hands shook, and my legs felt like they could give out at any moment. But I forced myself to keep moving. I couldn't fall apart. Not here. Not now. And then 20 minutes later, everything changed. Because when Emily and Richard entered the courtroom with smug confidence, expecting to see a judge ready to rule in their favor, they stopped dead in their tracks. Emily froze. Her mouth fell open. Her face drained of color. I sat in the judge's chair. Her eyes widened in pure shock, real shock, not the performative kind she used so often. She couldn't move. Couldn't speak. She just stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. Have you ever watched someone realize in an instant that their whole plan has just fallen apart? It's a look I'll never forget. But to understand how we reached that moment, I need to take you back. Back to where all of this truly began. Back to the little cracks in our family that slowly widened until everything collapsed. I always believed my life had settled into a gentle rhythm after I retired. My mornings started the same way for years. I woke up before the sun, boiled water in the same dented kettle I'd used since the early 80s, and stood by the kitchen window while the coffee filled the house with that warm, familiar scent. I used to think of it as peace. Looking back now, I realize it was merely the calm before the storm. Back then, Emily still visited me every Sunday. She insisted on taking me out to brunch, even though she always complained about the wait times at the places she picked. I didn't mind her little complaints. For a long time, I thought they were her way of coping with the pressures of adulthood. She had a demanding job, a big mortgage, and a husband she never spoke warmly about. But on those Sundays when she sat across from me with her chin resting on her hand, telling me about office drama or the latest renovation project in her house, I felt a closeness that reminded me of her teenage years. Maybe that's why I didn't see the change right away. The first sign was small, so small I would have ignored it if it hadn't kept happening. Emily began asking questions like, "Mom, do you remember what we talked about last week? Or did you forget to pay this bill again?" Always with that faint frown, just enough to make me second-guess myself. I laughed it off at first. "I'm retired, sweetheart," I told her once. "I forget things because I finally allow myself to, not because my mind is slipping." She gave me a little smile, but her eyes didn't match it. "Sure, Mom. Whatever you say." It didn't stop there. A few weeks later, she let herself into my house using the spare key I'd given her years earlier just in case, though she rarely used it before. I found her in the living room, pulling open drawers and looking through my old paperwork. "What are you doing?" I asked. She barely looked up. "Just trying to get things organized. You have too many loose papers lying around. It's not safe." I stepped closer, noticing she had gathered my medical documents, bank statements, and even the deed to the house into one pile. "Emily, those are private. You can ask me for what you need." She sighed dramatically, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Mom, I'm trying to help you. You don't keep track of things the way you used to. It's a mess." My chest tightened a little. "I managed just fine." She gave me that same patronizing smile she'd used since childhood whenever she thought she knew better. "If you say so." Have you ever felt someone gently pushing you aside from your own life? Not with force, but with small, calculated nudges that make you question yourself? That's how it began. The next sign came from Richard. At that time, our marriage was steady, I suppose. Not passionate, not particularly tender, but two people moving through familiar routines. He spent most evenings watching sports, and I spent mine reading or knitting or calling old friends. We shared meals, shared a bed, shared decades, but somewhere along the way we stopped sharing ourselves. One night, I walked into the kitchen and found him hanging up the phone quickly, almost guiltily. "Who was that?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "Just the bank." "The bank? This late?" He shrugged. "They called about a small issue with the joint account." I felt something twist inside me. Why didn't they call me? He paused a moment too long before answering. "Because I was the first one who picked up." His tone was flat, defensive. I let it go, but a faint unease lingered. Over the next few weeks, I noticed objects in the house slightly out of place. Nothing dramatic, just small shifts. A drawer left open that I knew I'd closed. A framed picture moved half an inch to the left. Pills in my medication organizer switched to different compartments. At first, I assumed I was becoming forgetful. I even chuckled about it to myself. "You're getting old, Margaret," I said one morning while struggling to remember where I'd left my reading glasses. But it didn't feel like normal forgetfulness. It felt intentional. Displaced. Then came the doctor's appointment. Emily insisted on taking me, even though I told her I could drive myself. "Mom, it's safer if I go with you," she said, gripping the steering wheel as if she were bracing for an argument. "Besides, the doctor needs to know what's been going on." "What's been going on?" I repeated. "Emily, I feel fine." She didn't answer. She just kept driving, her jaw clenched so tightly a vein in her temple pulsed. During the appointment, she spoke over me. Every time the doctor asked me a question, she jumped in with a correction. "She's been forgetting things. She lost her keys twice last month. She left the stove on." That one wasn't even true. The doctor glanced at me with polite concern. "Mrs. Hale, have you experienced any memory issues recently?" I swallowed. "Just normal things. Nothing unusual." Emily shot me a look. A warning disguised as worry. "Mom, be honest." Something inside me cracked a little at that moment. I felt small. Dismissed. As if she had taken the authority over my own mind away from me. When we got back to the car, I asked quietly, "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" she replied. "You made me seem confused. Incompetent." She rolled her eyes. "I'm trying to protect you, Mother. You don't realize how vulnerable you are." vulnerable. She said it like a diagnosis. But the breaking point came a week later when I found a manila envelope on the dining table. It wasn't mine. Inside was a stack of legal paperwork, medical proxies, power of attorney forms, documents assigning full financial control to Emily. And at the back of the stack was a signature. My signature. Except I hadn't signed anything. My hands trembled as I studied the loops and curves. It was similar to mine but not quite. A forgery. A bad one at that. I felt the air leave my lungs. My knees weakened. For a moment, I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I whispered into the empty room. Oh God, what are they doing? Have you ever discovered something that suddenly made every ignored red flag snap into focus? That was my moment. The moment the truth stopped whispering and started screaming. I confronted Richard that evening. Did you know about these papers? I asked, holding the envelope out to him. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, Emily just wants to help. You should let her. My voice trembled. By forging my signature? He avoided my eyes. You're imagining things. Imagining things. The oldest trick in the gaslighting handbook. I realized then that I couldn't trust either of them. Not with my home, not with my finances, not with my safety. I felt like a stranger in my own life, surrounded by familiar faces twisted into something unrecognizable. That's when I decided to call an old colleague, a man I hadn't spoken to in years. Lucas Raymond, an attorney I trusted. When he picked up, I felt tears sting my eyes. Lucas, I whispered. I think my family is trying to take everything from me. He didn't hesitate. Tell me everything. And so I did. By the time I finished, he was silent for several seconds. Then he said, Margaret, what you're describing is elder financial abuse. We need to move quickly. The word abuse caught in my throat. Abuse. From my own family. Lucas promised to help, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of strength return to me. But the truth is, I had no idea how deep the betrayal truly went. Not yet. That would come later. And it would be far worse than I imagined. Because this was only the beginning. I didn't sleep the night after I found those forged documents. I lay in bed with the ceiling barely visible in the dark, listening to the slow tick of the clock on my dresser, trying to understand how my life had unraveled so quietly behind my back. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's tight smile, her quick judgments, her dismissive tone. And then, almost worse, I saw Richard's blank expression, the look of a man who had already made peace with betraying me. But the papers had changed everything. They weren't careless hints or misunderstandings. They were intent. A plan. A roadmap to take my autonomy away, piece by piece, until I became nothing more than a name they controlled. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I barely tasted and began writing down every strange thing that had happened over the last several months. It was Lucas's idea. He said, start a log. Write everything down. Small details can turn into powerful evidence. And I trusted him, not just because he was a good attorney but because he knew me. He believed me without hesitation, something my own family refused to do. I filled 3 pages before I even looked up from the notebook. When I reread what I had written, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Emily wasn't just concerned. She wasn't being overprotective or dramatic. She was constructing a case against me. And she wasn't doing it alone. For days afterward, I watched everything more closely. I moved through my own home like a stranger taking inventory of a crime scene. It's strange how quickly your perception shifts once you accept that the people you love might be hurting you. I checked the locks twice at night. I started hiding my purse in different places, worried someone might slip papers inside it or take something out. One afternoon, while looking for a sewing kit I always kept in the hallway cabinet, I pulled open the drawer and found a small notebook tucked beneath a stack of old towels. It wasn't mine. The cover was cheap, the kind you get in a discount store. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside were lists, detailed lists. A column labeled sell, another labeled keep, and the last one labeled discard. My belongings were written item by item. The china set that had belonged to my mother. The jewelry Richard gave me for anniversaries. My grandmother's quilt. Even the living room furniture. Next to nearly every item was a dollar amount, estimates of resale value. My throat closed. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it in my ears. They weren't just trying to take control. They were planning to liquidate my life. God. Emily, I whispered, touching the page. But it wasn't only her handwriting. I recognized Richard's awkward slanted letters and several notes scribbled in the margins. Check jewelers downtown. Appraiser said values need verification. Mom won't need the car. Mom won't need the car. I had to sit down. My knees buckled beneath me from the weight of those words. It's one thing to suspect someone is manipulating you. It's another to hold written proof of their intentions in your hands. Have you ever felt your stomach drop in a way that made you wonder if you might faint? That was me, kneeling on my hallway floor with that awful notebook. I knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were preparing for a future where I no longer controlled my home, my belongings, or my decisions. I slid the notebook into my purse and drove straight to Lucas's office. He read it with a frown etched deep into his forehead. "This is worse than I thought," he said. "It looks premeditated. And if they're creating these documents, they may be hiding more." "I'm scared," I admitted. My voice trembled in a way I hated. Lucas leaned forward. "You should be cautious, yes, but not scared, because now you're aware. And awareness gives you power. You can't fight a threat you can't see, but you see this one clearly now." I nodded, though fear still pressed against my ribs. "What do I do next?" "You observe. You document. And you don't confront them until we have enough evidence to protect you legally." So that's what I did. The next few weeks turned into a quiet investigation. I watched Emily and Richard the way a detective watches suspects. I took notes every time they said something odd or unexpected. And the more I watched, the more disturbing the pattern became. Emily started stopping by unannounced more often. She let herself in with her key, walking through the rooms like she was inspecting the place. Sometimes she opened drawers or cabinets without explanation. Other times she simply stood there silently, scanning my kitchen or my living room as if imagining them without me. One morning I caught her in my bedroom. My bedroom. She was looking through my jewelry box. For a moment I froze in the doorway, unable to believe what I was seeing. My own daughter, her back turned to me, sorting through my necklaces and rings like she was choosing which ones to keep. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She jumped and closed the box quickly. "Mom, you scared me." I asked what you were doing. She sighed, as if burdened by my suspicion. "I noticed the latch on this box was loose. I didn't want your things to fall out." "That latch hasn't been loose in 20 years. Her eyes flicked to the floor. "Maybe it got loose recently." "Maybe," I said, though every part of me knew it was a lie. She stepped toward me and placed a hand on my arm. "Mom, you're being paranoid. I'm trying to help you. That's all." Paranoid. There it was again. The word she used whenever she wanted me to doubt myself. "I want my house key back," I said quietly. She stiffened. "What? Why?" "I don't like people entering without my permission." "People," she snapped. "I'm your daughter. I still want it back." She crossed her arms. "I'm not giving you the key. You're being unreasonable." I wanted to demand it, but I knew the moment I pressed too hard, she'd twist the conversation into another accusation of confusion or instability. So I stepped aside and let her leave. But my hands were shaking as I locked the door behind her. Have you ever felt someone silently erasing your independence 1 inch at a time? It's like drowning while the water rises so slowly that no one notices, least of all the person sinking. But things escalated even more. About 10 days after the jewelry box incident, I went outside to check the mailbox. I noticed a small crumpled note lying on the passenger seat of Emily's car, which she had parked haphazardly in my driveway. The car window was cracked open, enough for me to slip my fingers through. I don't know what made me reach for that paper. Maybe instinct. Maybe desperation. Maybe the quiet voice inside me whispering they're hiding something else. I unfolded it slowly. It was a list. This time a different kind of list. Mom's medical papers. Insurance policy check renewal date. Account numbers from desk drawer. Call home evaluator about house value. Talk to Richard about next steps. Care facility options urgent. There were scribbles in the margins, reminders to talk to a lawyer, to gather my records, to prepare argument for incompetency claim. Care facility. A legal argument to declare me incompetent. Notes about my insurance, my accounts, my house. My knees nearly gave out. I had to lean against the car to steady myself. This wasn't just about selling things. This was about removing me entirely from my own life. I folded the note with shaking hands and tucked it into my pocket. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I hurried back inside, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. For so long, I had told myself Emily was simply worried about me, that she didn't know how to express concern without sounding abrasive. But this was something else entirely. This was greed, calculation, cold strategy, and Richard was right there with her. I brought the note to Lucas that afternoon. He scanned it and shook his head slowly. "It's all right here," he said. "Intent, planning, coordination. They're building a case to take full legal control. This gives us grounds to act before they do." "What do?" I whispered. My hands were trembling again. "We file protective motions. We secure your accounts. And we start gathering evidence for your countercase." "My countercase?" I repeated. He nodded. "If they're planning to declare you incompetent, we need to prove they're doing it maliciously. And Margaret, I believe they are." I closed my eyes, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time, someone had said aloud what I had been afraid to admit. When I returned home that day, I didn't turn on any lights. I walked through the room slowly, absorbing the familiarity of each object. Every picture frame, every book on the shelf, every embroidered pillow carried memories of decades of living. And the thought of losing all of it, the thought of being forced out of the home I had built with my own hands, filled me with something darker than fear. Something like resolve. That night I called my neighbor Helen. She was a blunt, no-nonsense woman in her 70s who had lived next door since Emily was a toddler. She answered on the second ring. "Helen," I said softly, "I need to ask you something." "What is it, dear?" "Have you noticed anything strange happening at my house lately?" There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, "I thought you'd never ask." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "Honey, your daughter's been coming and going from your house at all hours. Sometimes she brings papers. Sometimes she just walks around the yard like she's inspecting the place. And Richard, well, he's been acting strange too." A cold weight settled in my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to cause trouble if everything was fine," she said. "But I knew something wasn't right. A mother knows. And you know too, don't you?" I sat down slowly. "Yes," I whispered. "I do." Helen exhaled sharply. "Whatever they're doing, you need to be careful. I've seen this before. Children get ideas. They think their parents are old and helpless. They smell money, houses, insurance. It changes people." I felt sick. I never thought I never imagined she would. "People surprise you," Helen said. "Not always in good ways." Her words settled heavy in the air. Over the next few days, I began to see the truth everywhere I looked. Emily wasn't just visiting. She was monitoring, assessing, searching for evidence or creating it. When I misplaced my keys one morning, she said, "See, this is exactly what I've been talking about." When I forgot to thaw the chicken for dinner, she muttered, "This is getting worse." When I hesitated while filling out a form, she said, "Mom, you can't keep living like this." Each comment chipped away at my confidence. Each little jab made me doubt myself, even when I knew the mistakes weren't mine. And sometimes, I wondered if she was purposely causing the things she later accused me of. One night, I found the stove burner turned on under an empty pan. I knew I hadn't used it that day. I never left the stove on, I was always careful. But there it was, heat radiating off a forgotten pan someone else had placed. I turned it off quickly, my heart racing. Why was this happening? Who had done this? Was Emily creating evidence that I was unsafe? Or was Richard? Or both of them together? Have you ever been afraid in your own home? Not of intruders, but of the people who share your life? That's where I was. Fearful, suspicious, alone. And then came the moment that shattered any remaining doubt. It was a Sunday morning. Emily had come over to check on me, though I hadn't asked her to. She walked around my house with exaggerated purpose, opening drawers, checking the fridge, peeking into the laundry room as if looking for something to criticize. When she reached the kitchen, she paused. "Mom," she said loudly. "Did you forget to pay the utility bill again?" "What?" I asked, startled. She pointed to an envelope sitting on the counter. "This is overdue." Picked it up. It was indeed stamped past due, but the bill wasn't mine. The envelope had a different account number, a different address. "This isn't my bill," I said. Emily's lips tightened. "Mom, please don't do this. It's time to accept that you're struggling. Dad and I want to help." Before I could respond, she pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the envelope. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Documenting," she said simply. My blood went cold. Documenting. She was collecting evidence. Evidence she planned to use against me. "Emily," I whispered. "Why are you doing this?" She met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something there that terrified me. A glint of triumph. Not concern. Not love. Triumph. "Because," she said quietly, "someone has to take charge before you ruin everything." Something in me broke. I stepped aside and let her finish her little inspection. My hands were ice cold. My breath felt shallow. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at Richard either when he arrived later and gave me that same blank, resigned look. When they finally left, I locked the door behind them and slid down to the floor, shaking. I realized then that I wasn't safe. Not from burglars. Not from strangers. Not from my own family. At that moment, I made a decision, the kind of decision you don't say aloud because it changes everything the moment it forms in your mind. I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to fight. Lucas had told me to gather evidence. But now I understood something deeper. My family wasn't just planning to hurt me. They were planning to erase me. I refused to let them. I stood up, wiped my tears, and opened my notebook. If they were building a case against me, I was building a stronger one. I wasn't a helpless old woman. I was a retired judge. I knew how evidence worked. I knew how cases unfolded. And I knew how liars were exposed in court. They had no idea who they were trying to manipulate. I turned on the living room lamp, sat down at the table, and began writing everything. Every word, every event. Every time my daughter hinted that I was confused or slipping. I wrote down the forged documents, the tampered drawers, the misplaced objects, the suspicious stove burner, the intrusive visits. And then, something unexpected happened. I found a voicemail on my phone. It was Helen. "Margaret, dear," she said in a low voice. "I saw your daughter and your husband talking in the driveway this afternoon. They were arguing and I overheard a few words. Something about getting it done before she realizes, and the lawyer said the timeline is closing. I don't know what they're planning, but it didn't sound good. Please be careful." I replayed the message 3 times. My hands shook more with each replay. That voicemail was my turning point. The moment I understood just how deep their betrayal truly went. But as horrifying as all of that was, none of it compared to what I discovered next. Because hidden beneath all the lies, all the manipulation, and all the secrets was something far worse. Something that revealed just how dangerous they had become. And that discovery changed everything. I didn't recognize my own heart anymore in those days. It beat differently. Not with the familiar rhythm of routine and comfort, but with a sharp, constant tension. Each morning I woke up wondering what new tactic Emily or Richard would use to push me closer to the edge of incompetency. And every night I lay in bed cataloging their words, their expressions, their subtle manipulations. Lucas's voice echoed in my mind constantly. "Document everything. Don't confront them. Let them reveal themselves." I followed his advice carefully. But sometimes, late at night, I wondered whether I was strong enough to handle what I might uncover. I wasn't ready for how deep their deception truly ran. The first major shift happened on a Thursday afternoon. The air was unusually warm for late autumn, and I opened the windows to let in some fresh air. I was dusting the bookshelf when I saw Emily's car turning into the driveway again. Unannounced as always. I froze. My hands trembled slightly as I set the duster down. I didn't want another performance of her false concern, her probing eyes scanning my home for evidence. But I couldn't avoid her. She was already walking up the front steps by the time I reached the door. I opened it only a crack. "Emily, what are you doing here?" She pushed the door wide open without waiting for my permission and walked right past me. "We need to talk." She talked as if I were a stubborn child. the tone of someone who had rehearsed her lines and expected obedience. She stopped in the middle of the living room, surveying it again like an inspector. "What is it now?" I asked, my voice tired. She held up a folder. "These are papers you need to sign." My stomach tightened. "Papers for what?" "Mom," she said with a sigh, as if I were being deliberately difficult. "We've been over this. You need help managing your affairs." "A lot of help." "No," I replied. "You've been over this. I haven't agreed to anything." She opened the folder and laid the documents on the kitchen table. "Just sign them. It will make everything easier." I approached slowly, keeping my distance. "Let me see." She pushed them toward me. "They're just basic authorizations. Nothing complicated. Things that will protect you." But I wasn't fooled. The first page was a medical release form. The second, a banking authorization. The third made my blood run cold. It was another power of attorney form, this time more formal, typed neatly, requiring only my signature to hand everything over to Emily. I looked up at her. "You said these were simple forms." "They are." "They aren't." She exhaled, annoyed. "You're being dramatic. I'm trying to take care of you." "I don't need this," I said quietly. "You're not my caregiver." "Oh, really?" She crossed her arms. "Then how do you explain the overdue bill? Or the stove? Or the fact that you lost your keys?" My heart dropped. She was using the staged incidents, her staged incidents, as ammunition. "I know what you're doing," I whispered. Her expression hardened instantly. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "You're trying to make me look incompetent." She laughed, quick, sharp, dismissive. "Mom, you're losing it. Seriously. And the more confused you get, the harder this becomes." I stepped back. "Get out." She blinked. "What?" I said, "Get out of my house." Emily's voice rose. "I'm not leaving until you sign these." My hands shook now, not from fear but from anger. "If you don't leave," I said, "I'll call the police." She stared at me in disbelief. It was the first time she had encountered any resistance from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she grabbed the papers, shoved them back into the folder, and stormed toward the door. "Fine," she snapped. "But this isn't over." Then she turned back, leaning in close, her voice like poison. "You think you're safe because you're stubborn. But you won't win, Mom. Dad and I are just trying to do what's necessary." She left without looking back. When the door slammed shut, I felt my entire body tremble. I had stood up to her, but the victory felt hollow because I knew she wasn't going to stop. She had merely paused. I called Lucas immediately. She tried to force me to sign more papers. He asked to see them. I sent photos. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "Margaret, this is a full attempt at control. They're escalating. We need to act faster than I anticipated." "Lucas, I'm scared," I said softly. "I know, but you're doing everything right. This evidence is strong." "But what if?" "Margaret," he interrupted gently, "they're digging their own grave. Keep documenting." I hung up and stared around the living room. Every chair, every photo frame, every book felt somehow tainted now, as if Emily's shadow lingered over everything she touched. The second major escalation came 3 days later. Richard arrived. He hadn't visited alone in months. When I saw him standing on my porch holding a small stack of envelopes, my heart twisted painfully. "Richard," I said, opening the door cautiously, "what do you want?" He didn't look at me. His eyes scanned the hallway behind me. "Emily said you were upset." "She told you that?" He shrugged, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "You know how you get when you're overwhelmed." "I don't get overwhelmed," I said sharply. He placed the envelopes on the counter. "These came to the house." I frowned. "What house?" "Our house." My breath caught. Slowly, I picked up the envelopes and flipped through them. They were addressed to me, forwarded to his address. "Why were these sent to your house?" I asked. "Because you changed the mailing address," he answered casually. "I didn't change anything." He shrugged again. "Maybe you forgot." No, I hadn't forgotten. I had never authorized what he was describing. "Richard," I said quietly, "what are you two doing?" He stiffened, finally meeting my gaze. "We're trying to help you." That's not help. That's control. He didn't answer. I took a breath. Did you change my mailing address? Silence. Richard. His jaw tightened. Emily said it was necessary. And you went along with it. Again, no answer. For 30 years, this man had been my companion. Maybe not always affectionate, maybe not always attentive, but present. Dependable. Predictable. And now he stood before me as a stranger. Someone who couldn't even defend his own decisions. My voice softened, even as my chest tightened painfully. Why, Richard? Why are you doing this to me? His lips thinned. He looked away. You're not the same anymore, Margaret. I'm not the same because you two are driving me insane. That's not fair. No, I snapped. What's not fair is the two of you scheming behind my back, forging signatures, staging confusion, and trying to take what I've built. He raised his hands. You're imagining things. Those words again. Those awful, sharp-edged words. I stepped back. Get out. He looked startled. Margaret. I said get out. When he hesitated, I repeated it louder, my voice breaking. Get out of my house. He finally left. When the door slammed shut behind him, my chest ached so violently I had to sit down. Betrayal doesn't come in one blow. It comes in waves, each one stronger than the last, each one pulling you under until you can barely breathe. I sat there for nearly an hour trying to calm the storm inside me. Later that night, something strange happened. A car stopped in front of my house, headlights cutting across my bedroom wall. First, I assumed it was a neighbor. But the engine didn't turn off. The car just sat there idling. Minutes passed. I went to the window and peered out. It was Emily's car. She wasn't coming inside. She was just sitting in the driveway, watching. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. Why was she there? What was she waiting for? What was she planning? After a few more minutes, she drove away. The next morning, I found footprints near the back door. Fresh ones from the night before. I felt like prey. I decided then that I needed more help. Not just Lucas. I needed someone to witness what was happening. Someone trustworthy. I called Helen again. Can you come over? I asked. Of course. When she arrived, I showed her the latest forged document, the changed mailing address, the footprints. Helen looked at me with fierce sympathy. They're closing in, dear. They think they already have you trapped. I know. She put her hand on mine. But they don't. Not if you fight smart. Her words lit something inside me. A fire I hadn't felt in years. For the next several days, I started documenting obsessively. I wrote down every suspicious sound, every object out of place, every comment Emily made that hinted at her intentions. I also installed a small recording device Lucas recommended, one that activated automatically when sound was detected. And then one afternoon when I wasn't home, it captured something. When I returned later and listened to the audio, my hands shook so violently I had to sit down. The recording began with the sound of keys turning in my lock. Emily. Her footsteps echoed through the house. She walked into the kitchen. I could hear her rifling through drawers. Then Richard's voice. Did you find it? Not yet, Emily said. She might have moved it. Try the bedroom. They walked down the hallway. Richard spoke again. Do you think Lucas suspects anything? No, Emily replied. He thinks she's paranoid. Once the judge sees the medical records and the financial mess, it'll be easy. My breath hitched. Medical records? Financial mess? None of that was true unless they were planning to create it. And then Richard asked the question that shattered me completely. What if she fights back? Emily laughed. A cold, confident laugh. She won't. She's too confused. And even if she tries, nobody will believe her. My vision blurred with tears. They searched my bedroom next. Drawers opened and closed. They were looking for something, I still don't know what. Then Richard said, we should do it soon. Emily agreed. Before she starts asking questions. They left the house minutes later. I heard the door lock behind them. I replayed the audio 4 times, each time feeling my heartbreak and rage mix into something new, determination. Pure, unshakable determination. If they wanted a battle, they were about to get one. I took the recording to Lucas. When he finished listening, he exhaled slowly. This is admissible, he said. It shows intent. Malice. Premeditation. Is it enough? Not yet, he said. But we're close. They're pushing, and their aggression will be their downfall. What do we do next? He leaned back in his chair. We build a case stronger than theirs. And we prepare for an emergency petition. Emergency? I asked. Margaret, he said gently, based on this recording, they may try to force a guardianship claim. That can happen suddenly. If they file before we do, they might gain temporary control until a hearing. My blood turned cold. So what do? I whispered. You gather everything. Every recording. Every document. Every witness. And then, he said calmly, we take them to court. The weight of his words settled deeply. We take them to court. The place where my career had once thrived. The place where justice lived. The place Emily and Richard thought would be their victory. I left Lucas's office with a plan forming in my mind, not just protection but strategy. I wasn't going to simply defend myself. I was going to expose them. It took days, long exhausting days, to organize everything. I worked tirelessly writing down every detail. Lucas helped with legal documents. Helen agreed to testify about what she had heard and seen. And the recordings, those were the strongest pieces. But the final blow, the discovery that cemented everything, came unexpectedly. It was a simple envelope taped to my front door. No name on the front. Just my address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a printed email exchange between Emily and a lawyer I had never heard of. The subject line read, Guardianship Petition Final Steps. My hands shook violently as I read the contents. They were planning to file it within days. Within days. Not months. Not weeks. Days. Emily had written, she's slipping more each week. We need to move forward before she realizes what's happening. And the lawyer had replied, I can file the emergency petition if you provide the additional evidence we discussed. Make sure she appears confused or unsafe during the evaluation. Appears. They were planning to stage my incompetence. I sank into a chair, the pages fluttering to the floor. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't confusion. It was real. All of it. Every piece. They were going to strip me of everything. My home, my finances, my independence, and place me in a facility before I even knew what hit me. But I knew now, and I wasn't going to let them win. I gathered all the evidence and drove straight to Lucas's office. He stayed late that night, putting together emergency motions, signings, filings, a full legal shield around me. When everything was prepared, he looked at me with a steady gaze. Margaret, he said, you're ready. For what? For war. I nodded. My chest tightened not with fear but with resolve. Because I knew one thing. The next time Emily and Richard walked into a courtroom expecting to destroy me, they would see me in the judge's chair. When I woke up that Monday morning, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't fear anymore. Not the trembling anxiety that had lived under my skin for weeks. It was focus. A steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Maybe not since my days on the bench, when I faced lawyers who underestimated me and defendants who lied straight to my face. I sat up slowly, my body still stiff from the restless night, and I whispered to myself, enough, because I had finally reached the point where survival wasn't the goal anymore. Justice was. After everything I discovered, the forged papers, the staged incidents, the email about the guardianship petition, I knew one thing clearly. Emily and Richard believed I was powerless. They thought I was confused, isolated, outmatched. They thought I was too old to fight. They had forgotten who I was. I made myself a cup of coffee, the ritual calming my nerves. The steam rose from the mug, and for the first time in weeks I actually tasted it, rich, strong, grounding. I sat at the table, staring at the pile of evidence spread out before me. The lists, the recordings, the photo of the forged signature, the voicemail from Helen, the printouts of the emails. Every piece told the same story. Every piece proved their intent. Lucas had assured me the protective filings were already in motion. You're safe now, Margaret, he had said. Legally safe. They can't blindside you anymore. But safe wasn't enough. Not now. I didn't want to simply protect myself. I wanted to look them both in the eyes and let them see everything they underestimated, everything they tried to break. Have you ever reached a moment in your life when you suddenly knew exactly who you were? That was me that morning. 68 years old. Betrayed by my own family. But clear-minded, sharp and ready. The plan began with something simple. An invitation. I composed the message carefully, making sure it sounded fragile enough to be believable. Emily, can you and your father come to dinner Wednesday evening? We need to talk. I don't want things to get worse between us. I reread it twice. It sounded defeated. Exactly the tone Emily expected from me. I sent it. It took 5 minutes for her to reply. We'll be there. 7 p.m. Don't worry, Mom. We'll help you figure this out. Help me. I almost laughed. Richard texted separately. We'll work through this as a family. A family. They used that word so freely. That entire day I cleaned the house. Not because they deserved a clean home, but because I needed my mind quiet. Order brings clarity. Chaos only feeds fear. I polished the dining table, wiped down the kitchen counters, folded linens, swept floors. It was almost meditative. And with each stroke of the cloth or sweep of the broom, I felt my resolve solidify. When Wednesday arrived, I dressed with intention. I chose a soft blue blouse, the same color I used to wear in court. The one colleague said made me look confident and composed. I pinned my hair neatly and wore my silver earrings, the pair Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary, back when his eyes still held warmth. Looking at myself in the mirror, I whispered, "You're not broken. They just hoped you were." At 6:58 p.m., their car pulled into the driveway. My heart thudded in my chest. I breathed in slowly, steadying myself. This was it. The moment everything began to shift. I opened the door before they could knock. Emily looked me up and down. "You look nice." "Thank you," I said calmly. "Come in." She walked inside confidently, as if she still owned the place. Richard followed behind her, his posture stiff and unreadable. "Dinner's almost ready," I said. "Sit. Let's talk first." Emily exchanged a glance with him, one I pretended not to catch. Suspicion, anticipation, a hunger for control. We sat at the dining table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays for decades. Now it felt like neutral ground in a battle they didn't realize they were already losing. Emily started. "Mom, I know things have been tense lately. You've been confused and that's okay. Aging is hard." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you think?" She gave me a condescending smile. "It's not what I think. It's what's happening." Richard nodded quietly. "We're worried about you, Margaret." I folded my hands. "And what exactly are you worried about?" Emily leaned forward, her tone softening into false compassion. "You can't keep track of things anymore. You misplace important documents. You're forgetting conversations. You left the stove on last week." I didn't correct her. I didn't argue. I let her talk. Rope, after all, is useless unless someone chooses to hang themselves with it. She continued. "Dad and I spoke with an attorney. He said we should look into legal ways to protect you." "Legal ways," I repeated slowly. She nodded. "You don't have to be scared. So many families go through this. We're just taking precautions." I took a long breath, letting silence settle. "Emily," I said gently, "do you really believe I'm confused?" She blinked. "Yes. Of course. Do you believe I can't handle my own decisions anymore?" She didn't hesitate. "No, Mom. You can't. And you believe," I said softly, "that you and Richard should take control of everything." "Yes." It was almost too easy. I stood up slowly, my hands steady as I walked to the side table where I had neatly stacked a folder, thick, heavy, filled with everything they didn't know I had. I placed it on the dining table between us. "What's that?" Emily asked. "Evidence," I said. She frowned. "Evidence of what?" "Of everything you've done." Her face went pale. Richard stiffened. I flipped open the folder, my voice calm, steady. "This is the list you made of my belongings and how much you could sell them for. This is the forged signature on the first power of attorney form. These are the photos of the staged overdue bill with the wrong account number. These are the recordings of you entering my home without permission. And this," I held up the printed emails, "is the correspondence between you and the lawyer planning the guardianship petition." Emily's mouth fell open. "Mom!" I raised a hand. Be quiet. She froze. I continued, my voice quieter now, not gentle but lethal. I know everything. Every plan. Very lie. Every attempt to make me appear incompetent. Richard swallowed hard. Margaret, it's not what you think. I looked directly into his eyes. It's exactly what I think. Emily shook her head violently. You don't understand. We were trying to. Save me? I asked. Protect me? Help me? I leaned forward. Or steal from me? She stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. None of that will hold up in court. It already has, I replied. Lucas filed everything this morning. The shock that crossed her face was almost painful to watch. Almost. You what? She whispered. Filed, I repeated. Protective orders. Motions. Evidence. A formal complaint for attempted elder abuse. Her breathing quickened. No, this can't. And there's more, I said, keeping my tone even. There's a hearing scheduled. When? She demanded. Tomorrow. She stared at me as if I had turned into a stranger. Or worse, a threat. Richard cleared his throat. Margaret, please. Let's talk about this. No, I said. We're done talking. Silence settled over the room like dust. Have you ever seen someone realize they've lost control? It's a fascinating moment, the exact instant when arrogance dissolves into fear. Emily finally sat back down, her knees weak. You blindsided us, she whispered. I almost laughed. How ironic. Then I said the words that changed everything. Tomorrow, when you walk into that courthouse, you won't be facing the woman you thought you could manipulate. You'll be facing someone who remembers exactly who she is. Her eyes filled with panic. Mom, please, you don't have to do this. Yes, I said. I do. Because the truth was simple. I hadn't started this war. They had. I had simply decided to win it. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen. Dinner's ready, I said without turning back. But if I were you too, I wouldn't stay long. Neither of them moved. Emily whispered. What's going to happen tomorrow? I turned and met her eyes with a calm she clearly didn't anticipate. You'll see, I said. Very soon. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt powerful again. Because they had no idea what waited for them in that courtroom. No idea at all. I barely slept the night before the hearing. I lay in bed with my eyes open, listening to the creaks of the house, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing occasionally on the street. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. But I was awake with something sharper than fear. Anticipation. I kept imagining the moment Emily and Richard would walk into the courthouse, still believing they had the upper hand, unaware of the truth waiting to hit them like a freight train. Every time I pictured their expressions, the confusion, the panic, the disbelief, my heartbeat settled a little more. Dawn finally came, painting the kitchen in pale gold. I made coffee with steady hands. I showered. I dressed in the gray suit I had worn the day I handed down my final judgment before retiring. It still fit, not perfectly, but with enough confidence stitched into its seams to make up for the slight tightness. I pinned my hair carefully, put on the same silver earrings I had worn when Emily graduated high school, back when she still looked at me with something like love, and stood in front of the mirror. Remember who you are, I whispered. And I did. I grabbed the folder of evidence and left the house a full hour early. Lucas had asked me to meet him in the small preparation room right beside the courtroom. He was already there when I arrived, pacing with a stack of papers in his hands. When he saw me, his eyes widened. Margaret, you look like you're about to bench an entire jury. I smiled. Good. I want them to see it. He exhaled, visibly relieved. Are you ready? Yes, I said without hesitation. More than ready. He set out the documents on the table. Everything is filed, stamped, and accepted. The judge is aware that we are countering the guardianship petition with our own evidence of abuse. She's open-minded, but she'll want everything laid out clearly. She'll get clarity, I said. Lucas paused, then softened. I'm proud of you. I swallowed a lump in my throat. Thank you. We worked in silence for a few minutes, reviewing statements, organizing recordings, labeling photos. My hands never shook. Not once. It felt like muscle memory from my years on the bench. Evidence, truth, justice. They were familiar companions. At 8:47 a.m., Lucas checked his watch. They'll be here any minute. They don't know we're meeting the judge first. Good. I felt my heart settle into an old rhythm. The rhythm of authority, of presence, of control. I followed Lucas out into the hallway, the familiar scent of old books and polished floors filling my lungs. We knocked on the judge's chamber door, and a moment later Judge Rosalind Carter opened it. She was younger than me by at least 15 years, but she carried herself with confidence and quiet force. We had worked together briefly years ago, when she was still a clerk, and she had always been respectful. "Margaret," she said warmly, "it's good to see you." "You too," I replied. We sat across from her as Lucas began explaining everything. He placed the forged documents on her desk, then the recordings, then the emails. Judge Carter listened intently, occasionally raising her eyebrows or taking notes. When Lucas played the audio recording, the one of Emily and Richard breaking into my home, she leaned back slowly. "That is damning," she said. "It's the truth," I replied softly. She nodded. "I don't doubt it." After 30 minutes of discussion, she folded her hands. "This will not go the way they expect. I appreciate your integrity in bringing this forward quietly rather than publicly." I looked her in the eyes. "I never wanted a war. But they forced one." She nodded again and stood. "Let's proceed." We walked back into the hallway, and that's when I saw them. Emily, Richard, standing side by side. Emily in a beige pantsuit, Richard in a poorly fitted jacket. They both looked confident, arrogant even, as if they were walking into their victory lap. When Emily saw me, she froze. Richard blinked, confused. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply looked at them. Emily quickly masked her surprise with a patronizing expression. "Mom," she said, approaching slowly. "You look nice." "Thank you." Richard cleared his throat. "We're glad you came. We thought maybe you'd forget." His voice trailed off awkwardly. I didn't respond. Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Mom, I know you're scared. This is going to help you." Lucas cut her off. "Miss Hale, everything you need to say can be said in the courtroom." She frowned at him. "Who are you again?" Lucas smiled politely. "Her attorney." Emily's face cracked just a fraction, but it cracked. "Attorney?" she asked, stunned. "For what?" "For what's about to happen," I said. Before she could respond, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. "It's time." Emily's eyes flicked from me to the judge's bench, then back again. She didn't understand yet, but she would. We walked inside. The room was small, intimate, the kind used for guardianship hearings or emergency motions. Only 10 rows of benches, soft gray walls, large windows letting in morning light. We approached the front, and Judge Carter took her place at the bench. Emily and Richard sat at the left table, their new attorney, a man named Graham McAllister, joining them with a stack of papers and a smug expression. Lucas and I sat on the right. I could feel Emily staring at me. She kept fidgeting, adjusting her blouse, tapping her foot. I didn't look at her. Not yet. When the bailiff called the session to order, the room fell still. Judge Carter glanced at Emily's attorney. "Mr. McAllister, you filed an emergency guardianship petition against Mrs. Hale, claiming she is incompetent to manage her own affairs." "Yes, Your Honor," he said confidently. "Her daughter and husband have expressed deep concern." She held up a hand. "We will get to that. I have reviewed your petition." Emily sat straighter, waiting for praise. "And I have several questions," the judge continued. McAllister nodded eagerly. "Of course. First," she said, lifting the top page, "this petition claims the respondent left her stove on repeatedly." "That's correct," he replied. "It's a pattern of cognitive decline." "Except," Judge Carter said, "the photo you submitted of the stove left on features a model manufactured in 2019. Mrs. Hale's stove is from 2004. Emily froze. The attorney blinked. Well, we were told." "Second," the judge continued, turning the page, "you submitted a list of overdue utility bills." "Yes," the attorney said, regaining some confidence. "Proof of financial mismanagement." "Except," she said calmly, "these bills are addressed to a property that is not hers." Emily inhaled sharply. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Third, the judge said, picking up another document. You filed a medical statement signed by a Dr. Harold Wilkinson. Yes, he said. He evaluated Mrs. Hale. No, he didn't, the judge replied. Because Dr. Wilkinson died 6 months ago. The courtroom fell silent. Emily's face went white. Richard swallowed hard. I waited. Judge Carter set the papers down deliberately. This petition raises serious concerns, not about Mrs. Hale, but about the motivations behind the attempt. Emily's attorney stammered. Your Honor, surely there's a misunderstanding. Is there? She asked calmly. Because I have additional evidence submitted by Mrs. Hale's attorney. Emily whipped her head toward me, her eyes wide. I finally looked at her. Judge Carter nodded at Lucas. He stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, we have recordings, documents, and correspondence that demonstrate a coordinated attempt to manufacture the appearance of incompetence. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Richard whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. Lucas continued. Additionally, we have evidence of unlawful entry into the respondent's home and attempted coercion for signature on legal documents. Judge Carter nodded. Please play the recording. Lucas pressed a button on a small speaker. Emily's voice filled the courtroom. Clear. Undeniable. Cold. Did you find it? Not yet. She's slipping more each week. We need to move forward before she realizes what's happening. Do you think Lucas suspects anything? No. Make sure she appears confused during the evaluation. The last line echoed. Appears confused. The courtroom was silent enough to hear a breath drop. Emily's face crumpled. That audio is out of context, she blurted. She's confused. She forgets things all the time. Judge Carter turned to me. Mrs. Hale, is there anything you'd like to say? I stood slowly. My knees didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. I spoke the way I used to speak in court, calm, factual, unbroken. For weeks, they came into my home uninvited. They tried to stage confusion, forge signatures, and isolate me from my own life. They wanted control of everything I built, everything I earned. They treated me as if I were already gone. Emily's breathing hitched. But I am not gone, I continued. I am here. I am aware. And I see them clearly. I turned to face Emily and Richard fully. For the first time in my life, I see them clearly. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Mom, please. I looked back at the judge. I'm asking the court not only to dismiss their petition but to recognize the attempted abuse and act accordingly. I sat down. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. She turned to Emily and Richard. Would either of you like to respond? Emily wiped at her eyes. Mom, I didn't mean. This is not family therapy, the judge said sharply. This is a legal proceeding. Do you contest the evidence? Emily froze. Richard's voice broke the silence. Your Honor, we were trying to. Mr. Hale, she said. I advise you to stop speaking. Richard closed his mouth. The judge folded her hands. Given the overwhelming evidence, I am denying the guardianship petition. Furthermore, I am approving the protective orders requested by Mrs. Hale's attorney. Emily looked as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. Richard's head dropped. As for the fabricated evidence, the judge continued, her tone harder now, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review. Forging legal documents, staging incompetence, and entering a home unlawfully are serious offenses. Emily gasped. Richard flinched. McAllister stiffened, realizing the case had turned into a criminal liability. Judge Carter stood. Court is adjourned. Her gavel fell. The sound echoed through the entire room. A sharp final punctuation to months of torment. Emily stared at me as the bailiff opened the doors. Mom, you ruined us. I met her gaze. No, Emily. You ruined yourself. She shook her head. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I said softly, I did. Because sometimes the only way to survive is to stop forgiving the people who count on your silence. Lucas placed a hand on my shoulder. It's done, he said gently. But I knew it wasn't. Not fully. A case like this has consequences, legal, emotional, social. There were things still left unsaid, still left unresolved. And there was one last conversation that needed to happen before I could close the chapter. One last confrontation. Because when I stepped out of the courtroom that morning, into the crisp air of the courthouse steps, something inside me whispered, "This isn't over, not yet." When I stepped out of the courthouse, the morning air felt different, cooler, sharper, almost cleansing. For a long moment I stood at the top of the steps, breathing deeply, letting the sunlight warm my face. I could still hear the echo of the gavel in my mind, a sound that felt like the final exhale of a nightmare I'd been trapped in for months. Lucas walked beside me, keeping a respectful silence. He knew I needed a moment. Down below near the curb, Emily and Richard stood talking in hushed, frantic voices. Their attorney was gesturing wildly, clearly explaining the consequences awaiting them now. Emily wiped her eyes again and again, her shoulders shaking. Richard looked hollow. I didn't look away. For once I didn't shrink. I didn't soften. I didn't question whether I had gone too far. I simply watched them the way one watches a distant storm finally breaking apart. "Do you want me to walk you to your car?" Lucas asked gently. I shook my head. "I'll be all right." He nodded. "If you need anything at all, you call me." "I will." He squeezed my shoulder and left, heading toward the parking lot. I waited until he was gone before beginning to walk down the courthouse steps. Halfway down I heard Emily's voice. "Mom, please, can we talk?" I stopped, turning slowly toward her. She moved cautiously, as if approaching a wounded animal, or perhaps as if she was the wounded one now. Richard hung back, unable to meet my eyes. Emily's mascara was smudged, and her hands trembled as she tucked her hair behind her ear. I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered. I thought you needed help." "No," I said softly. "You thought I was easy to control." She flinched. "I thought you loved me," she said, her voice breaking. "I do love you," I replied. "But love isn't a permission slip for abuse." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Mom." I was scared. "You're getting older." And it felt like everything was falling apart. I wanted to protect the family. By destroying me? She opened her mouth but couldn't answer. For a moment we just stood there. Two women bound by blood and betrayal. The distance between us bigger than the entire courthouse behind me. Finally, Emily whispered, "Can you forgive me?" The question hung in the air. Heavy. Painful. Honest, maybe. Or maybe just desperate. I took a slow breath. "Forgiveness isn't a door you can rush through, Emily. You broke something that will take time to heal. If it ever does." Her chin quivered. "But I'll tell you this," I continued. "Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. And right now I'm choosing peace. When I'm ready, we'll talk again." She nodded weakly, tears spilling over. "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't answer. Not with words. I simply walked past her. Calmly, firmly, and felt the weight of her gaze on me as I moved forward. When I reached my car, my hands didn't tremble as I unlocked the door. For the first time in a long while, I felt anchored in my own life again. I drove home in silence, the road stretching ahead like a promise. The house greeted me with its familiar scent, coffee, old books, and the faint lavender fragrance I always kept by the hallway window. For a while I just walked through the rooms, touching the back of a chair, the corner of a table, the frame of a family photo. Everything felt different. Not because the house had changed, but because I had. That afternoon, Helen came by with 2 grocery bags and the brightest smile I had seen in weeks. "So," she asked, placing a carton of eggs on the counter, "did justice win today?" "It did," I said. She clapped her hands together. "I knew it. I absolutely knew it. They didn't stand a chance." "I'm tired," I admitted. "You're allowed to be tired," she said, moving around my kitchen as if it were her own. "But don't confuse exhaustion with defeat. You didn't lose, Margaret. You reclaimed your life." I sank into a chair, letting her words wash over me. Helen boiled water for tea, humming softly. "What's next for you?" she asked. I sighed. "I don't know." "Well," she said, setting a cup in front of me, "for the first time in months, that's a good thing." I smiled faintly. "I suppose it is." We sat together in comfortable silence, sipping our tea. That evening, after Helen left, I walked into my study and sat at the old oak desk. I opened a blank notebook and pressed the pen to the page. The words flowed easily. Today I got my life back. As I wrote, I realized something. I didn't want to return to who I was before all of this. That woman was quiet, trusting, gentle to the point of self-erasure. She forgave too easily. She overlooked too much. She assumed threats came from the outside, not from the people she loved most. No, I wasn't going back to her. I had become someone new, stronger, sharper, more deliberate. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The sun was setting, washing everything in amber light. Suddenly I felt the urge to go outside. I stepped into the backyard, the grass cool under my shoes. The air smelled like damp earth and the faint sweetness of the lilac tree I planted decades ago. I tilted my head back and looked at the sky. A blend of orange and lavender. For the first time in months I felt free. Not victorious. Not triumphant. Just free. Have you ever survived something that nearly broke you, and afterward wondered who you were supposed to become now? That was me, standing in my backyard, breathing in the soft evening air. I wasn't the same woman who had stood trembling in her living room weeks ago. I wasn't the same woman who had once believed her family would never hurt her. I wasn't even the same woman who walked into the courthouse that morning. I was someone new. Someone who reclaimed her voice. Someone who remembered her strength. Someone who understood that surviving a betrayal doesn't mean you heal from it overnight, but it does mean you get to choose what comes next. I closed my eyes. I let the quiet settle around me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with the unknown. Inside the house, my phone buzzed with notifications, messages from lawyers, updates from the court, likely more desperate attempts from Emily. But I didn't check it. Not yet. Tonight belonged to me. I walked back inside and turned on the porch light, letting its warm glow spill across the entryway. As I locked the door, I whispered to myself, tomorrow will be a new kind of day. I didn't know what it would bring, but for the first time that didn't scare me. Felt like possibility. Felt like freedom. It felt like the beginning of the rest of my life.